In the vast expanse of the Kepler Mining Consortium's asteroid belt operations, where alien species work side by side to extract precious minerals from floating rocks, hygiene is more than a preference. It's survival. When toxic dust particles can kill you in minutes, and acidic compounds eat through armor plating, cleanliness isn't just next to godliness. It's the difference between breathing and becoming space debris. But what happens when the most powerful being on your mining station, a 3,000-year-old crystalline dragon from the Vorthak Empire, hasn't properly cleaned himself in 3 millennia? What happens when his accumulated grime becomes so toxic that it threatens to shut down the entire operation, potentially stranding 40,000 workers in the void between stars? And what happens when the only person brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to confront this ancient, prideful creature about his personal hygiene is a 28-year-old human foreman from the backwater colonies of Earth, armed with nothing but industrial soap, a pressure washer, and the kind of stubborn determination that made humanity the most feared problem solvers in the galaxy. Marcus Rodriguez never expected that his biggest challenge wouldn't be managing the extraction quotas or dealing with equipment failures. He never imagined he'd have to teach a being older than human civilization itself something as basic as taking a bath. But in space, the impossible becomes routine, and sometimes the fate of thousands depends on convincing a dragon that maybe, just maybe, it's time to get clean. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength, the ability to solve problems others won't even acknowledge exist, save an entire mining operation, and forge an unlikely friendship between a stubborn human and a very dirty dragon. Marcus Rodriguez had worked in some terrible places during his 15-year career in asteroid mining. He had endured the sulfur storms of Titan Station, breathed the recycled air of overcrowded transport ships for months at a time, and once spent 2 weeks in a broken waste processing facility on Europa Base. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for Kepler Mining Station Omega 7 and the creature that resided in its deepest levels. The first sign of trouble had come during his orientation briefing. Chief Administrator Zalta, a 7-foot-tall insectoid from the Chitinous Collective, had clicked her mandibles nervously when discussing the station's layout. Her compound eyes had darted around the room as she spoke about the lower mining levels, and her usually precise diction became hurried and uncertain. The lower levels are restricted, she had said, her translator unit struggling with what Marcus suspected were curse words in her native language. Only essential personnel are permitted below level 15. There are complications. Marcus had raised his hand. What kind of complications? Structural integrity? Radiation leakage? Hostile alien fauna? The room had gone silent. Even the Vraxian heavy lifters, beings known for their fearlessness in the face of exploding asteroid cores, had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zalta's antennae had twitched, and she had made a sound that the translator had rendered as concerned clicking. The complications are aromatic in nature, she had finally said. We have a resident who has been with us for quite some time. A very important resident. A very unwashed resident. That had been 3 weeks ago. Marcus had spent those weeks learning the ins and outs of the station, familiarizing himself with the 40,000 workers from 67 different species, and slowly piecing together the truth about what everyone simply referred to as the situation. The station operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, extracting rare minerals from the asteroid field that surrounded them. The work was dangerous, requiring precision and coordination between species that had evolved on worlds with vastly different atmospheric compositions and gravitational conditions. The air recycling system worked overtime to maintain breathable conditions for everyone, filtering out everything from methane-breathing Gaussians to the ammonia-based life support requirements of the tentacled ones from Rigel 7. But there was something the filters couldn't handle, something that grew stronger and more noticeable the deeper into the station one went. By level 10, most workers wore breath masks. By level 12, even the famously odor-tolerant sludge people from the Andromeda Processing Collective refused assignments. And below level 15, Well, below level 15 was where the real problem lived. Marcus first encountered the smell on a Tuesday. He had been inspecting a malfunctioning or conveyor on level 14 when it hit him like a physical force. It was as if someone had taken the concentrated essence of a thousand-year-old garbage dump, mixed it with the exhalation of a sulfur volcano, added the funk of a locker room that had never been cleaned, and then somehow made it worse. The smell had weight and presence, seeming to coat the inside of his nose and throat with a greasy film that no amount of water could wash away. He had stumbled backward, eyes watering, and slammed into Maintenance Chief Borgin, a typically unflappable rhinoceros-like being whose species was renowned for their inability to smell anything at all. Ah, Borgin had rumbled, his trunk-like nose twitching with what Marcus realized was probably sympathy rather than detection of the odor. "You have encountered the dragon's domain." "Dragon?" Marcus had gasped, fumbling for his emergency breathing apparatus. "Zayrath the Crystalline," Borgin had explained matter-of-factly. "Ancient being from the Vorthak Empire. Been here since before the station was built. Mining rights contract holder for this entire asteroid field. Also," Borgin had paused, searching for diplomatic words, "also has some personal maintenance issues." The full scope of the problem had become clear over the following days as Marcus interviewed various department heads and long-term workers. Zayrath the Crystalline was indeed a dragon, specifically a 3,000-year-old crystalline dragon whose individual mining claims covered the entire asteroid field. The Kepler Mining Consortium had been forced to negotiate a joint operation agreement with him, essentially making him a partner rather than an obstacle to be overcome. In exchange for a percentage of all extracted minerals, Zayrath provided security for the operation and used his considerable knowledge of asteroid composition to identify the richest mining sites. It was a profitable arrangement for everyone involved, with one significant drawback. Zayrath had not properly bathed in approximately 3,000 years. "It wasn't always this bad," explained Yilnara, the station's chief medical officer, a tall, graceful being whose species had evolved from something resembling a cross between a praying mantis and a butterfly. Her gossamer wings fluttered nervously as she spoke. When a station was first established, his quarters were simply aromatic. But over the years, the accumulation of dust, mineral deposits, shed scales, and what I can only assume are the remains of his meals have created a toxic microenvironment that threatens the entire station's life support system. She had pulled up a holographic display showing the air quality readings throughout the station. The numbers grew progressively worse as the levels descended, until reaching level 16, where Zayrath made his home. There, the readings were simply marked with flashing red symbols that Marcus's translator couldn't even process. "The filtration system is operating at maximum capacity just to keep the upper levels habitable," Dr. Yilnara continued. "If we cannot resolve this situation soon, we may be forced to evacuate the station entirely. The economic impact would be catastrophic." The personnel files on Zayrath made for fascinating reading. He was old enough to remember when humans were still discovering fire, had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 different galactic civilizations, and possessed knowledge of mineral formations that had helped establish the most profitable mining operations in known space. He was also, according to every account Marcus could find, incredibly proud, easily offended, and absolutely convinced that his personal habits were beyond reproach. Previous attempts to address the hygiene situation had ended in disaster. 5 years ago, a well-meaning janitorial specialist from the Cleanliness Guild of Arcturus had suggested that Zayrath might benefit from a light dusting. The dragon's response had been to temporarily seal himself in his quarters, raising the ambient temperature to levels that had nearly melted the station's superstructure. The janitorial specialist had been ejected into space, though not before Zayrath had thoughtfully provided him with an emergency breathing apparatus and propulsion unit. 3 years later, a diplomatic mission led by Ambassador Veltar from the Galactic Hygiene Council had attempted a more subtle approach, offering Zayrath a collection of the finest soaps and cleansing materials from across the galaxy as a gift of respect and admiration. Zayrath had thanked them politely, accepted the gifts graciously, and promptly used the soap to construct an elaborate sculpture in his quarters that he claimed represented the futility of artificial cleanliness in the face of natural authenticity. The soap sculpture remained in his quarters, slowly dissolving in the toxic atmosphere and adding its own unique chemical notes to the already overwhelming smell. The most recent attempt had been made by Chief Administrator Zalta herself, who had tried to frame the issue as a matter of station safety and efficiency. Zayrath had listened patiently to her presentation, nodded thoughtfully at her charts and graphs, and then explained that he considered his current aromatic state to be a natural defense mechanism that kept unwanted visitors away from his private space. He saw no need to change something that was working so effectively. And that was where things stood when Marcus arrived. The station was slowly being overwhelmed by the emanations from level 16. Productivity was dropping as workers called in sick with mysterious respiratory ailments, and the Galactic Health and Safety Administration was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the facility's environmental compliance status. Marcus spent his first few weeks observing the situation from a distance, learning everything he could about dragon psychology, Vorthack cultural practices, and the specific challenges of interspecies diplomacy. He read every available text on crystalline dragon biology, studied the history of successful negotiations with ancient beings, and even consulted with a xenopsychologist about the best approaches for dealing with creatures whose lifespan exceeded that of most civilizations. What he discovered was both fascinating and daunting. Crystalline dragons like Zayrath were incredibly long-lived, highly intelligent, and possessed of a complex social structure based on concepts of personal honor and territorial integrity. They were also notoriously set in their ways, viewing any suggestion for change as a potential insult to their judgment and wisdom. The fact that Zayrath had been living the same way for 3,000 years wasn't a problem to be solved from his perspective. It was evidence of the superiority of his chosen lifestyle. But Marcus also learned something else, something that previous negotiators had either missed or dismissed as irrelevant. Crystalline dragons were, at their core, deeply social creatures who valued competence and respected those who could solve problems that others couldn't. They appreciated directness over diplomacy, results over rhetoric, and had a particular fondness for individuals who could demonstrate practical skills and unwavering determination. Most importantly, they respected those who were willing to get their hands dirty in pursuit of a solution. As Marcus stood outside the entrance to level 16, wearing the heaviest-duty environmental suit the station could provide, he reflected on the advice he had received from his grandfather, a man who had spent 50 years working in the most challenging construction projects on Earth. Boy, his grandfather had always said, sometimes the best way to handle a difficult situation is to stop talking about the problem and start working on the solution. The access corridor to level 16 was lined with warning signs in 43 different languages, all essentially conveying the same message: dangerous atmospheric conditions, authorized personnel only, extreme caution required. Marcus's environmental suit was reading atmospheric conditions that would have been lethal to most species, and even with full filtration, he could still detect the underlying smell that had driven so many others away. He palmed the access control, and the blast doors slowly cycled open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that seemed to shimmer with an oily haze. Emergency lighting cast an eerie glow on walls that were stained with decades of accumulated grime, and the floor was covered with what looked like a combination of shed dragon scales, mineral dust, and substances Marcus preferred not to identify. As he walked deeper into the dragon's domain, Marcus could hear something that surprised him: the sound of machinery. Complex, sophisticated machinery operating at peak efficiency. Whatever else could be said about Zayrath's personal habits, he clearly maintained his mining equipment in perfect condition. The contradiction was both puzzling and encouraging. The corridor opened into a vast cavern that had been carved directly from the asteroid's mineral core. The walls glittered with exposed veins of precious metals and exotic crystals, creating a natural cathedral of stunning beauty that was almost completely obscured by layers of accumulated filth. Sophisticated mining equipment hummed quietly in alcoves throughout the space, their surfaces gleaming with meticulous care that stood in stark contrast to everything around them. And there in the center of it all was Zayrath the Crystalline. Marcus had seen images of crystalline dragons in his research, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of encountering one in person. Zayrath was magnificent, even beneath the layers of grime that coated his form. He stood nearly 20 feet tall, with a serpentine neck that curved gracefully upward and wings that, when fully extended, would have spanned the entire cavern. His scales, where they were visible beneath the accumulated dirt, sparkled like cut gemstones, shifting through the entire spectrum as they caught and refracted the ambient light. But the majesty of the creature was almost completely hidden beneath what appeared to be several decades' worth of mining dust, food debris, shed scales, and substances that Marcus's suit couldn't identify, but marked as potentially hazardous. The dragon's natural crystalline beauty was buried under a coating of grime so thick that it had formed its own ecosystem, complete with what appeared to be several species of bacteria that glowed faintly in the dim light. Zayrath looked up as Marcus approached, his ancient eyes focusing on the human with interest rather than annoyance. When he spoke, his voice was a deep, melodious rumble that seemed to resonate through the cavern walls. "Ah," the dragon said, his translator rendering the words in perfect, if archaic, English. "A new human. How refreshing. Most of your species refuse to venture into my domain. I am Zayrath the Crystalline, Lord of the Deep Veins, Master of the Asteroid Fields, and Keeper of the Ancient Mining Wisdom." He paused, tilting his massive head to one side. "And you are?" "Marcus Rodriguez." Marcus replied, managing to keep his voice steady despite the overwhelming assault on his senses. "I'm a new human resources foreman. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Zayrath's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus could have sworn he saw amusement flicker across the dragon's features. "Human resources foreman? How wonderfully direct. And what brings you to my domain, Marcus Rodriguez? Surely not another tedious presentation about atmospheric conditions and productivity metrics." Marcus took a deep breath, grateful for his suit's filtration system, and made a decision that would either solve the station's biggest problem or get him ejected into space. "Actually, I'm here about your equipment maintenance procedures. I've been reviewing the station's operational data, and I have to say I'm impressed by the condition of your mining gear. Everything I can see is running at peak efficiency, maintained to standards that exceed anything we've achieved on the upper levels." For the first time in what was probably decades, Zayrath looked genuinely surprised. His massive form shifted slightly, and several pounds of accumulated debris fell from his scales, creating small clouds of dust that his environmental systems immediately labeled as toxic. "My equipment maintenance," the dragon repeated slowly. "You are here to discuss my equipment maintenance. Among other things," Marcus continued, walking closer to examine one of the nearby mining units. "This is incredible work. These machines must be, 30 years old? 40? But they're running like they just came off the production line. You've clearly developed maintenance procedures that are far superior to standard protocols." Zayrath's chest swelled with what was unmistakably pride. "I have indeed. These machines are an extension of my will, tools through which I shape the asteroid fields to my purposes. Of course, I maintain them properly. A craftsman is only as good as his tools, and a dragon's tools must be perfect." "Absolutely," Marcus agreed, running his gloved hand along the pristine surface of a drill assembly. "Perfect tools require perfect maintenance, which is actually what I wanted to talk to you about." And there it was, the opening Marcus had been looking for, the angle that no one else had thought to try. Not hygiene, not diplomacy, not safety regulations, but maintenance. Professional pride. The respect of one craftsman for another's work. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had come to Zayrath not to criticize his lifestyle, but to admire his competence. And that, Marcus realized, was going to make all the difference. Zayrath's massive head lowered until his ancient eyes were level with Marcus's visor, and the human could see his own reflection multiplied in the dragon's multifaceted gaze. The smell inside the cavern was beyond description, even with his suit's protection, but Marcus forced himself to remain still and focused. This was the moment that would determine whether his approach would work or whether he would join the long list of beings who had tried and failed to solve the station's most persistent problem. "You wish to discuss my maintenance procedures?" Zayrath repeated, his tone curious rather than defensive. "That is unexpected. Most beings who venture into my domain come with complaints about atmospheric conditions or requests for modifications to my personal habits. You are the first to express interest in my professional practices." Marcus nodded, gesturing toward a nearby or processor that hummed with quiet efficiency. "I've been in mining for 15 years, worked on stations across 3 sectors, and I've never seen equipment maintained to these standards. The operational efficiency ratings for your sector exceed anything else on the station by a significant margin. Your techniques could revolutionize maintenance protocols throughout the entire consortium." The dragon's chest rumbled with what Marcus recognized as pleased amusement. "Ah, a human who appreciates quality workmanship. How delightfully rare." Zayrath moved with surprising grace for such a massive creature, gliding over to the processor Marcus had indicated. This particular unit has been in continuous operation for 37 years. During that time, it has processed more raw ore than any 5 standard units combined, all while maintaining precision tolerances that most engineers would consider impossible. "How do you do it?" Marcus asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "The manual for this model recommends complete overhaul every 18 months. You've been running it for over 30 years. Zayrath's scales seemed to shimmer with pride, though the effect was muted by the layers of accumulated grime that coated his form. "The secret, my friend, is understanding that maintenance is not merely about replacing worn parts or following predetermined schedules. True maintenance is about developing a relationship with your equipment, learning to hear what it tells you, responding to its needs before they become failures." The dragon extended one massive claw toward the processor, and Marcus was amazed to see that despite the filth covering the rest of his body, the claw itself was meticulously clean, polished to a mirror shine. With delicate precision that seemed impossible for such a large appendage, Zayrath adjusted a series of microscopic calibration dials on the machine's control panel. "Each machine has its own personality," Zayrath continued, his voice taking on the tone of a master craftsman discussing his art. "This processor, for example, runs best with a slight increase in pressure differential during the 3rd stage of refinement. The manual specifies standard parameters, but the manual was written by beings who never spent decades listening to the subtle variations in operational harmonics that indicate optimal performance." Marcus watched in fascination as the dragon's claw moved across the machine's surface, making minute adjustments with the skill of a virtuoso musician tuning a precious instrument. The irony was impossible to ignore. Here was a being who maintained his equipment with obsessive precision while apparently never cleaning himself. "Your knowledge is incredible," Marcus said, and meant it. "I can see why the consortium wanted to partner with you. But I have to ask about something that's been puzzling me. You maintain these machines to standards that exceed anything I've ever seen, but, Zayrath prompted, his ancient eyes focusing on Marcus with sudden intensity. Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that this moment would determine the success or failure of his mission. "But the environmental conditions in your domain are creating challenges for the station's life support systems. The accumulated atmospheric particulates from your living space are overwhelming the filtration systems throughout the facility." Zayrath's expression shifted, and Marcus could see the dragon's defenses beginning to rise. "Ah, there it is. The real reason for your visit. Not admiration for my craftsmanship, but Another complaint about my perfectly natural living conditions. No, Marcus said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that your maintenance expertise could be the solution to a problem that's affecting your equipment's performance. The dragon paused, his head tilting to one side with obvious curiosity. Explain. Marcus moved to the cavern's air circulation system, a complex network of intake and exhaust vents that Zayrath had clearly modified and improved far beyond standard specifications. Look at this system. It's brilliant. You've optimized the airflow patterns to maintain perfect temperature and humidity levels for your equipment. But the particulate load in the atmosphere is forcing the system to work harder than it needs to. It's like having perfectly tuned engines, but running them on contaminated fuel. Zayrath followed Marcus to the air circulation controls, his massive form moving with surprising quiet. I have noticed some decrease in efficiency, he admitted reluctantly. The intake filters require replacement more frequently than they should, and the atmosphere processors are operating at higher power consumption levels than optimal. Exactly, Marcus said, warming to his theme. And it's not just your equipment. The contamination is spreading throughout the station through the connected air systems. Every machine on every level is working harder than it should because they're all running on atmospheres that contain particles and compounds that shouldn't be there. The dragon was silent for a long moment, his ancient mind clearly processing this information. When he spoke again, his tone was thoughtful rather than defensive. You are suggesting that my living conditions are creating a maintenance problem that extends beyond my personal domain. I'm saying that your expertise in equipment maintenance has identified a problem that no one else even realized existed. Marcus replied carefully. The question is whether there's a solution that would optimize performance throughout the entire system without compromising your personal preferences. Zayrath's eyes brightened with what Marcus recognized as genuine interest. A systems optimization challenge. How intriguing. And you believe that addressing the particulate contamination in my domain would improve performance station-wide. I know it would, Marcus said confidently. But the solution would have to be implemented by someone with your level of expertise. Standard cleaning protocols wouldn't work here. This would require a complete environmental systems overhaul, using advanced techniques that most maintenance crews couldn't even comprehend. The dragon's chest rumbled with amusement. You are quite skilled at this, Marcus Rodriguez, framing a hygiene intervention as a systems optimization project. But I am not entirely naive. I understand what you are attempting to accomplish. Marcus felt his heart sink. Had he overplayed his hand? Had the dragon seen through his approach and taken offense? But instead of the anger he expected, Zayrath's expression remained thoughtful, almost calculating. However, the dragon continued. Your approach has merit. I have indeed noticed decreased efficiency in my equipment, and if the contamination is affecting systems throughout the station, then addressing it becomes a matter of professional responsibility rather than personal preference. Will you be willing to consider an environmental optimization project? Marcus asked, hardly daring to believe that his strategy might actually be working. I will be willing to discuss it, Zayrath replied carefully. But any such project would need to meet certain criteria. First, it must be conducted using methods that respect the delicate balance of my domain's ecosystem. Second, it must result in measurable improvements to equipment performance. And third, it must be implemented by individuals who possess the expertise necessary to work with systems of this complexity. Marcus nodded eagerly. Absolutely. I wouldn't suggest anything less. In fact, I've been researching advanced cleaning technologies that might be suitable for this kind of specialized application. Industrial-grade sonic cleaning systems, plasma-based particulate removal, molecular-level atmospheric scrubbing techniques. Molecular-level atmospheric scrubbing? Zayrath's interest was clearly piqued. I'm not familiar with this technology. It's cutting-edge stuff, Marcus explained, pulling up holographic displays on his suit's external projectors. Essentially, it uses targeted electromagnetic fields to break down specific molecular compounds at the atomic level, converting them into harmless component elements that can be safely processed by standard atmospheric recycling systems. The dragon studied the technical specifications with obvious fascination. Fascinating. And this technology can be applied to biological organic compounds as well as mineral particulates. That's the beauty of it, Marcus said, warming to his presentation. It's completely non-discriminatory in terms of compound types, but it can be precisely calibrated to target only specific molecular signatures. So you could remove accumulated particulates and organic debris without affecting the underlying mineral composition of your scales or the delicate crystalline structures that give you your natural beauty. Zayrath's massive form straightened, and Marcus could see that he had struck exactly the right note. The dragon was vain about his appearance, even buried beneath decades of grime, and the suggestion that cleaning might actually enhance rather than diminish his natural magnificence was clearly appealing. You suggest that this molecular scrubbing would restore rather than alter my appearance? The dragon asked, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes bright with interest. I'm saying that it would remove the accumulated foreign materials that are currently obscuring your natural crystalline structure, Marcus replied diplomatically. Based on my research into crystalline dragon physiology, your scales should have a natural luminescence that's probably been dimmed by decades of accumulated particulates. The molecular scrubbing would essentially restore your original appearance. The dragon moved to a polished metal surface that served as a mirror, studying his reflection with obvious displeasure. Even through the coating of grime, Marcus could see the magnificent creature that lay beneath, and he suspected that Zayrath could see it too. I had not considered, Zayrath said slowly, that my current condition might be concealing rather than protecting my natural appearance. The choice is entirely yours, Marcus said carefully. But, from a purely technical standpoint, the environmental optimization project would benefit everyone involved. Your equipment would run more efficiently, the station's atmospheric systems would operate at peak performance, and I would regain the luminescence that has made my kind the envy of dragons throughout the galaxy. Zayrath finished, his voice filled with sudden longing. Very well, Marcus Rodriguez. I am willing to undertake this environmental optimization project. But I have conditions. Marcus's heart leaped with excitement, but he kept his expression neutral. I am listening. First, the work must be performed by technicians who understand the delicate nature of crystalline dragon physiology. I will not allow amateurs to experiment upon my person. Of course, Marcus agreed. I would personally oversee every aspect of the process. Second, the molecular scrubbing must be performed gradually, in stages to allow my systems to adjust to the changing environmental conditions. I am an ancient being, and sudden changes could be harmful to my health. Absolutely. We would develop a careful, phased approach that prioritizes your comfort and safety. And third, Zayrath continued, his voice taking on a note of stern authority, this project will be conducted in complete privacy. I will not be subjected to the curious stares of station personnel or the commentary of beings who lack the sophistication to understand the complexity of what we are undertaking. Complete privacy, Marcus agreed immediately. This would be a specialized technical operation, not a public spectacle. Zayrath nodded slowly, his ancient eyes studying Marcus with what appeared to be growing respect. You have approached this situation with considerably more intelligence and sensitivity than your predecessors. Very well. When would you propose to begin this environmental optimization project? Marcus had to resist the urge to pump his fist in triumph. After 3 years of failed attempts by diplomats, bureaucrats, and specialists, a simple appeal to professional pride and technical expertise had succeeded where all other approaches had failed. I would need some time to acquire this specialized equipment, he said, his mind already racing through the logistics. The molecular scrubbing technology isn't standard equipment, and I want to make sure we have everything we need for a complete, successful optimization. Shall we say 2 weeks for preparation and equipment acquisition? 2 weeks, Zayrath agreed. That will give me time to complete my current mining operations and prepare my domain for the optimization process. I trust you understand that this is not merely a matter of cleaning, but of restoration. I expect results worthy of the investment of my time and trust. You'll get results that exceed your expectations. Marcus promised, and he meant every word. This wasn't just about solving the station's air quality problems anymore. This was about restoring one of the galaxy's most magnificent creatures to his full glory, and Marcus was determined to make it perfect. As he prepared to leave Zerath's domain, the dragon called out to him one final time. "Marcus Rodriguez?" "Yes. I find myself curious about your motivations. You could have approached this situation with threats or ultimatums, as others have done. Instead, you chose to engage with my expertise and treat me as a professional equal. Why?" Marcus thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because that's what you are. You're the most skilled mining engineer I've ever met, and you've been doing this job longer than my entire species has existed. It seemed foolish to treat you as anything other than the expert you clearly are." Zerath's laugh was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to make the entire cavern ring like a bell. "How wonderfully human. I begin to understand why your species has become such effective problem solvers. Very well, my friend. In 2 weeks, we shall undertake the greatest environmental optimization project this station has ever seen." As Marcus made his way back through the contaminated corridors toward the upper levels, he allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The hard part was over. Now all he had to do was figure out how to give a 3,000-year-old dragon the most thorough bath in galactic history without killing himself in the process. How hard could it be? The next 2 weeks transformed Marcus from a mining foreman into something resembling a cross between a chemical engineer, a xenobiologist, and a very determined janitor. His first challenge was acquiring equipment that didn't officially exist for a purpose that no one had ever seriously attempted. "You want to do what to whom?" asked Supply Coordinator Zephyra, her tentacled form quivering with what Marcus had learned to recognize as either laughter or horror among the cephalopodian species. Her translator was having difficulty processing his request, rendering it as a series of bewildered clicks and whirs. "Environmental molecular optimization," Marcus repeated patiently, having learned that euphemisms were essential when discussing the project. For a large-scale crystalline entity with complex surface particulate accumulation issues. Zephyra's main eye stalk swiveled to focus on him with laser intensity. "Marcus, I have been managing supply requests for this station for 8 years. I have provided equipment for every conceivable mining operation, dealt with the exotic material requirements of 67 different species, and once somehow acquired a functioning temporal stabilizer for the Chronic delegation. But this..." She gestured at his equipment list with 3 tentacles simultaneously. "This is beyond anything I have ever seen." The list was indeed impressive. Industrial-grade molecular scrubbing units capable of processing several tons of material per hour. Atmospheric isolation chambers designed to contain potentially toxic particulates during removal. Specialized crystalline-safe cleaning compounds that could remove organic matter without damaging delicate mineral structures. Pressure washing systems powerful enough to strip paint from starship hulls, but precise enough to clean the surface of a soap bubble. The molecular scrubbing units alone would cost more than our entire quarterly maintenance budget, Zephyra continued. And that's assuming I could even find suppliers willing to ship equipment of this caliber to an asteroid mining station. Most of these systems are used for decontaminating entire planets after industrial accidents. Marcus had anticipated this problem and come prepared with a solution that was both elegant and slightly devious. "Actually, I've been thinking about this as a research and development opportunity. If we can successfully demonstrate molecular-level environmental optimization in a challenging industrial setting, the data would be incredibly valuable to the Galactic Mining Consortium. We could potentially patent new cleaning techniques, license the procedures to other mining operations, and establish the station as a center of excellence for advanced environmental management." Zephyra's tentacles went still, a sure sign that she was giving his words serious consideration. Research and development funding, she mused. That would come from an entirely different budget category. And if we could demonstrate commercial applications for the technology. Exactly, Marcus said, pressing his advantage. The consortium has been looking for ways to improve atmospheric management throughout the mining fleet. If we can develop proven techniques for large-scale molecular optimization, we could license the technology to every mining operation in the galaxy. The supply coordinator's tentacles began moving again, this time in the rapid, complex patterns that indicated intense calculation. The research and development application would need to be approved by the board of directors, but if the project shows potential for commercial application. She paused, her main eye focusing on Marcus with renewed interest. You really believe you can make this work? I know I can. Marcus replied with more confidence than he actually felt. The technology exists. We have a perfect test case, and the potential applications are enormous. This could revolutionize environmental management throughout the entire consortium. 3 days later, the equipment began arriving. Massive shipping containers marked with biohazard warnings and experimental technology, handled with extreme care labels. Marcus watched the unloading process with a mixture of excitement and terror, knowing that he had committed himself to an undertaking that was either going to be remembered as a triumph of human ingenuity or as one of the most spectacular failures in the history of interspecies relations. The molecular scrubbing units were the size of small buildings, requiring an entire cargo bay for assembly. Each unit contained enough processing power to analyze and break down molecular compounds at the atomic level, with precision controls that would allow Marcus to target specific types of contamination while leaving underlying structures completely untouched. Dr. Yilnara had insisted on conducting a complete medical evaluation of the equipment before it was used anywhere near Zerath. Crystalline dragons are incredibly resilient, she explained as her delicate fingers danced over the medical scanning equipment, but they are also irreplaceable. If something goes wrong, we cannot simply order another 3,000-year-old mining expert from the nearest supply depot. The medical scans revealed both encouraging and concerning information about Zerath's condition. The layers of accumulated grime were indeed affecting his health, reducing the efficiency of his natural respiratory systems and interfering with his ability to properly regulate his body temperature. But the contamination had also formed a kind of protective barrier that would need to be removed gradually to avoid shocking his system. We will need to proceed in stages, Dr. Yilnara advised. No more than 20% of the surface area per session, with at least 48 hours between treatments to allow his physiology to adjust. And we will need to monitor his vital signs continuously throughout the process. Marcus spent the remaining time developing detailed procedures for what everyone had begun calling Operation Dragon Wash, though never in Zerath's presence. The dragon had made it clear that he viewed the project as a sophisticated technical procedure, not a glorified bath, and Marcus was determined to maintain that professional atmosphere throughout. The plan was complex, but methodical. First, they would establish an environmental containment field around Zerath's domain to prevent contaminated particles from spreading throughout the station during the cleaning process. Then, they would begin the molecular scrubbing in carefully controlled phases, starting with the accumulated mineral deposits and working their way through the organic matter and biological waste products. Each phase would be followed by detailed analysis to ensure that the process was proceeding safely and effectively. The removed materials would be processed and recycled where possible, with the valuable minerals extracted and added to the station's production quotas. Even the organic waste would be converted into useful compounds for the station's agricultural systems. The day before the project was scheduled to begin, Marcus made a final visit to Zerath's domain to review the procedures and ensure that everything was prepared. He found the dragon in what appeared to be a state of nervous anticipation, meticulously cleaning and adjusting his mining equipment with even more obsessive care than usual. Second thoughts, Marcus asked gently as he watched the dragon polish a drill bit that was already gleaming. "Hardly," Zerath replied, though Marcus could hear the uncertainty beneath his confident tone. "I'm simply ensuring that my equipment is in perfect condition for the optimization process. It would be embarrassing if inferior maintenance practices were revealed during such an important technical procedure." Marcus nodded understanding. "It's natural to be concerned about any major system modification. But remember, we can stop the process at any time if you're uncomfortable with the results. This is your project, and it proceeds only as long as you want it to continue." Zerath's massive head turned toward Marcus, and the human could see gratitude in the ancient eyes. "You understand the significance of what we are undertaking. This is not merely about atmospheric management or equipment efficiency. For 3,000 years, I have existed in a state that I convinced myself was natural and appropriate. To change now, to admit that perhaps there was a better way." He paused, searching for words. "It requires a courage that I had not realized I possessed. It requires the same courage that led you to leave your home world and build a life among the asteroids," Marcus replied. "The same courage that made you the most successful mining engineer in the galaxy. You're not changing who you are, Zerath. You're just finally showing the universe who you've always been underneath." The next morning, Marcus arrived at level 16 to find that Zerath had made his own preparations for the optimization process. The dragon had moved all of his most precious possessions to protective alcoves and had arranged his mining equipment in careful patterns that would allow optimal access for the cleaning procedures. Most surprisingly, he had attempted to clean a small section of his left forearm, revealing a patch of crystalline scales that sparkled like captured starlight. "I wanted to see," Zerath explained somewhat sheepishly when he noticed Marcus staring at the clean patch. "I had almost forgotten what my scales looked like beneath the accumulated materials." The patch was breathtakingly beautiful. The scales shifted through the entire spectrum as they moved, each one a perfect crystalline structure that caught and refracted light in ways that seemed to defy physics. The contrast with the grime-covered areas around it was stark and somewhat sad, like seeing a single flower blooming in a field of weeds. "The optimization process will restore all of it," Marcus promised. "By the time we're finished, your entire form will have that kind of clarity and brilliance." The first phase of the operation began with the establishment of the environmental containment field. The molecular scrubbing units hummed to life, their sensors analyzing the atmospheric composition and identifying the thousands of different compounds that needed to be processed. The readings were staggering. The air in Zerath's domain contained everything from simple mineral dust to complex organic molecules to compounds that Marcus's equipment couldn't even identify. Beginning phase 1 molecular analysis. Marcus announced into his communicator, knowing that half the station's population was monitoring the operation from a safe distance. "All systems showing green. Dragon vital signs are stable and within normal parameters." The molecular scrubbing beams were invisible to the naked eye, but their effects became apparent within minutes. The air itself seemed to shimmer as billions of particles were identified, isolated, and broken down into component atoms that could be safely processed by the station's atmospheric recycling systems. The smell that had plagued the lower levels for decades began to fade, replaced by the clean, neutral atmosphere that the life support systems were designed to maintain. Zerath stood perfectly still as the scrubbing beams played over his massive form, his ancient eyes closed in what appeared to be deep concentration. Occasionally he would shift slightly to allow the beams better access to particularly contaminated areas, but otherwise he remained motionless, trusting completely in Marcus's expertise and the sophisticated technology that surrounded him. The first section to be cleaned was Zerath's left wing, an area that had been heavily contaminated with mineral deposits from years of contact with or dust. As the molecular scrubbers worked their way across the wing's surface, the accumulated grime simply dissolved away, revealing crystalline structures of impossible beauty beneath. The wing scales were like living gems, each one a perfect crystal formation that had grown and shaped itself over millennia of careful cultivation. They shifted through colors that had no names, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to move independently of the wing itself. As more of the wing was revealed, the patterns began to connect and flow, creating a single unified design that was both organic and geometric, chaotic and perfectly ordered. "Magnificent," Dr. Yilnara whispered over the communication system. "I had no idea that crystalline dragon wing patterns were so complex. This is like watching a work of art being restored." Zayrath's eyes opened as the first wing was completed, and he turned his massive head to look at the cleaned appendage with obvious amazement. "I had forgotten," he said quietly. "I'd actually forgotten how beautiful my wings were meant to be." The cleaning process continued throughout the day, with each section revealing new wonders that had been hidden beneath decades of accumulated grime. Zayrath's scales were not uniform in color or structure, but varied across his body in patterns that told the story of his long life. Some areas sparkled with the pure clarity of newly formed crystals, while others showed the deep, complex colorations that came only with great age and experience. His chest scales were particularly magnificent, formed in overlapping patterns that created natural armor of incredible strength and beauty. His neck scales were smaller and more delicate, designed for flexibility and grace rather than protection. And his tail scales were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, each one a perfect miniature crystal formation that caught and held light like a living prism. As the day progressed and more of Zayrath's true form was revealed, word of the transformation spread throughout the station. Workers from every level found excuses to visit the upper decks, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary dragon who was finally emerging from beneath his coating of grime. The station's official communications channels buzzed with reports and updates, and Marcus noticed that productivity throughout the facility had actually increased as workers found new motivation in the knowledge that their most challenging problem was finally being solved. But the most remarkable transformation was in Zayrath himself. As each section of his body was cleaned and restored, the ancient dragon seemed to grow more confident and proud. His posture straightened, his movements became more graceful, and his voice took on a resonant quality that seemed to make the very air around him vibrate with authority and presence. "I feel as though I am awakening from a very long sleep," he told Marcus during a break in the cleaning process. "For so many years, I convinced myself that my appearance was unimportant, that only my knowledge and skills mattered. But now," he paused, studying his reflection in a polished metal surface. "Now I remember what it means to be a crystalline dragon. Not just a mining engineer who happens to be draconic, but a true representative of my species." As the first day of Operation Dragon Wash came to an end, Marcus stood back to admire their progress. They had completed approximately 30% of the cleaning process, and the results were already spectacular. The portions of Zayrath that had been restored gleamed with natural luminescence, casting subtle patterns of colored light across the walls of the cavern. The air itself was cleaner and fresher, with the toxic particulates that had threatened the station's life support systems finally being processed and removed. But most importantly, Zayrath himself seemed transformed, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The proud, ancient being who had hidden himself away for decades was beginning to emerge, and Marcus could see hints of the magnificent creature he must have been in his younger centuries. "Tomorrow we continue," Zayrath announced as Marcus prepared to leave for the day. And Marcus? Yes, thank you for approaching this with the respect and professionalism that it deserved, for treating me as an equal rather than as a problem to be solved, for helping me remember who I truly am. Marcus nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that went far beyond the simple completion of a challenging assignment. "Thank you for trusting me with something so important. Tomorrow we're going to finish the job, and when we're done, this station is going to have the most magnificent dragon in the entire galaxy." As he made his way back to the upper levels, Marcus could hear something that the station hadn't heard in years, the sound of Zayrath singing. It was a deep, resonant melody that seemed to come from the very heart of the asteroid itself, a song of joy and renewal that echoed through the corridors and made every worker stop what they were doing to listen. The dragon was remembering how to be beautiful, and the entire station was celebrating with him. The second day of Operation Dragon Wash began with an unexpected complication. Marcus arrived at level 16 to find a crowd of station personnel gathered around the entrance to Zayrath's domain, all straining to catch a glimpse of the transformation that was taking place within. Word of the dragon's restoration had spread throughout the facility, and it seemed that half the station's 40,000 workers had found reasons to be in the vicinity. "Back to your posts, all of you," Marcus announced firmly, though he couldn't entirely blame them for their curiosity. The change in atmospheric conditions throughout the station had been noticeable to everyone, and the improvement in air quality had made work more pleasant throughout all levels. "This is a precision technical operation, not a tourist attraction." Chief Administrator Zalta pushed through the crowd, her compound eyes bright with excitement. "Marcus, the environmental improvement reports are extraordinary. Atmospheric quality has improved by 67% station-wide, and our energy efficiency ratings have increased by 12% overnight. The board of directors is calling it the most significant operational improvement in the consortium's history." Marcus nodded acknowledgement, but kept moving toward the dragon's domain. He was pleased by the positive results, but his primary concern was completing the restoration process safely and effectively. Zayrath had entrusted him with something incredibly precious, and he was determined not to let the dragon down. Inside the cavern, Marcus found Zayrath examining himself in every available reflective surface, studying the cleaned portions of his body with obvious fascination. The dragon's movements had a new quality of grace and confidence that hadn't been there the day before, and his scales seemed to glow with internal light that made the entire space brighter and more welcoming. "Good morning, my friend," Zayrath called out as Marcus approached. "I trust you are prepared for another day of technical excellence." "Absolutely," Marcus replied, checking his equipment readings. "How are you feeling? Any discomfort or unusual sensations from yesterday's work?" "Quite the opposite," the dragon said, stretching his partially cleaned wings with obvious pleasure. "I feel more energetic and alert than I have in decades. It is as though the removal of the accumulated contamination has allowed my natural biological processes to function more efficiently." He paused, tilting his massive head thoughtfully. "I had not realized how much the accumulated materials were affecting my health and well-being." Dr. Yilnara's voice came through the communication system with her daily medical update. "All of Zayrath's vital signs are excellent. Better than excellent, actually. His respiratory efficiency has improved by 40%. His circulation is operating at optimal levels, and his neural activity shows increased clarity and focus. Whatever we're doing, it's working better than I dared hope." The second day's cleaning focused on Zayrath's torso and head, the most complex and delicate areas of his anatomy. The scales on his chest and neck were smaller and more intricate than those on his extremities, requiring more precise control from the molecular scrubbing systems. Marcus worked with the concentration of a surgeon, carefully adjusting the equipment to ensure that every trace of contamination was removed without damaging the delicate crystalline structures beneath. As the cleaning progressed, the true artistry of crystalline dragon anatomy became apparent. Zayrath's scales were not simply beautiful decorations, but functional components of a sophisticated biological system. The chest scales were arranged in patterns that optimized both protection and flexibility, while the neck scales were designed to facilitate the complex muscular movements required for his species' legendary vocal abilities. Most remarkable were the scales around Zayrath's head and face, which formed intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as he moved. These scales were connected to his sensory organs, allowing him to detect molecular-level changes in atmospheric composition and identify mineral deposits at distances that would be impossible for most species. The restoration of these scales had clearly improved his sensory capabilities, as evidenced by his increased awareness of subtle changes in his environment. "I can smell colors," Zerath announced with wonder as Marcus worked on the scales around his nostrils. "I had forgotten that my species could distinguish atmospheric conditions by scent patterns. The contamination had blocked these abilities for so long that I had stopped noticing their absence." The cleaning of Zerath's head revealed features of startling nobility and intelligence. His eyes, no longer obscured by accumulated grime, showed depths that seemed to contain the wisdom of millennia. His facial structure combined strength and elegance in proportions that spoke of evolutionary perfection, while his horns curved gracefully upward in patterns that followed mathematical principles of structural engineering. But it was when Marcus began cleaning the dragon's crest that the true magnificence of crystalline dragon anatomy was revealed. The crest was a complex arrangement of crystalline formations that rose from the top of Zerath's head in a crown-like structure of breathtaking beauty. Each crystal was a perfect geometric form that caught and refracted light in ways that created a constantly shifting aurora around the dragon's head. "The crest serves multiple functions," Zerath explained as Marcus carefully cleaned each crystal formation. "It regulates my body temperature, enhances my sensory capabilities, and serves as a display structure during social interactions with other dragons. In my youth, it was considered one of the finest examples of crest development in my generation. As the crest was restored to its full glory, its true purpose became evident. The crystals weren't just decorative, but functional components of a sophisticated biological system that allowed Zerath to interface directly with mineral formations and technological systems. The restoration of his crest had enhanced his already impressive mining abilities to levels that bordered on the supernatural. "Watch this," Zerath said with obvious pride, extending one claw toward a nearby or processor. Without touching the machine's controls, he somehow activated it and began adjusting its operational parameters through what appeared to be direct mental interface. The crest crystals can generate electromagnetic fields that interact with electronic systems. It is how my species developed such advanced mining techniques. Marcus watched in amazement as Zerath demonstrated abilities that no other species possessed. The dragon could sense the internal structure of asteroid formations from hundreds of kilometers away, identify the exact mineral composition of or deposits without physical sampling, and interface with technological systems in ways that made him essentially a living supercomputer specialized for mining operations. "This is why the consortium wanted to partner with you," Marcus realized. "It's not just your knowledge and experience. You have capabilities that no other being in the galaxy possesses." "Indeed," Zerath agreed, his restored crest glittering with pride. "And now that these capabilities have been fully restored, I can offer services that will revolutionize mining operations throughout this sector." The final phase of the cleaning process focused on the intricate details that completed Zerath's transformation. The spaces between his scales, the delicate membrane structures of his wings, the complex joint mechanisms that allowed his massive form to move with such grace and precision. Each area revealed new wonders as the accumulated grime was removed and Zerath's true anatomy was revealed. When the last of the molecular scrubbing was completed, Marcus stepped back to admire their work. The creature that stood before him bore little resemblance to the grime-covered being he had met just days earlier. Zerath the Crystalline now lived up to his name in ways that exceeded Marcus's most optimistic expectations. The dragon's entire form sparkled with inner light, his scales shifting through spectrums of color that created a living light show of impossible beauty. His wings, fully extended in a display of magnificent span, cast rainbow patterns across the cavern walls. His crest glowed with crystalline fire, and his eyes held depths that seemed to contain the secrets of the universe itself. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, his voice hushed with awe. Zayrath moved with fluid grace to the largest of his polished metal mirrors, studying his reflection with obvious satisfaction. "I feel reborn," he said finally. "For 3,000 years, I have hidden beneath layers of accumulated neglect, convincing myself that appearance was irrelevant and that only function mattered. But now I remember that for my species, beauty and function are inseparable. I am not merely a mining engineer who happens to be draconic. I am Zayrath the Crystalline, and I am magnificent." The transformation was more than physical. As word of Zayrath's restoration spread throughout the station, something remarkable happened. Workers who had spent years avoiding the lower levels began making excuses to visit level 16. Not from morbid curiosity, but from a genuine desire to witness something truly extraordinary. Zayrath, for his part, seemed to blossom under the attention. The proud, isolated creature who had hidden himself away for decades began to engage with the station's community in ways that surprised everyone. He offered mining consultations to teams working on particularly challenging extractions, shared his vast knowledge of asteroid geology with the station scientists, and even began teaching advanced mineral processing techniques to interested workers. "It's remarkable," Chief Administrator Zalta told Marcus a week after the completion of Operation Dragon Washington. "Productivity has increased across all departments. Worker morale is at an all-time high, and our extraction efficiency has improved by 23%. Having Zayrath actively engage with our operations has transformed this facility from a standard mining station into the most productive extraction operation in the entire consortium fleet." But the most significant change was in the relationship between Zayrath and the station's human personnel. Marcus had become something of a celebrity among the human workers, the man who had somehow convinced a 3,000-year-old dragon to take a bath. But more importantly, Zayrath had developed a genuine appreciation for human problem-solving capabilities and determination. "Your species possesses a remarkable quality," Zayrath told Marcus during one of their regular consultations. "You approach problems that others consider impossible with a combination of creativity and stubbornness that often succeeds where more sophisticated approaches fail. You saw a situation that had defeated diplomats and specialists for years, and you solved it by treating it as a maintenance issue rather than a psychological problem. The success of Operation Dragon Wash had implications that extended far beyond the confines of Kepler Mining Station Omega-7. The techniques developed for Zayrath's restoration were adapted for use in other mining facilities, leading to improvements in atmospheric management throughout the consortium fleet. The molecular scrubbing technology proved useful for a variety of industrial applications, and the research data generated by the project led to several breakthrough developments in environmental engineering. Marcus found himself promoted to Director of Advanced Environmental Operations, a position that had been created specifically to recognize his innovative approach to complex problems. He was assigned to work directly with Zayrath on developing new mining techniques that combined human ingenuity with crystalline dragon abilities. But perhaps the most important result was the friendship that developed between Marcus and Zayrath. The ancient dragon and the young human engineer discovered that they shared a passion for solving complex technical challenges and a deep respect for craftsmanship and excellence. They spent hours discussing mining techniques, equipment optimization, and the philosophical implications of working with systems that existed at the intersection of technology and biology. "I have learned something important from our collaboration," Zayrath told Marcus one evening as they reviewed plans for a new extraction operation. "For 3,000 years, I believed that wisdom came only with age, that experience was the most valuable quality an individual could possess. But you have shown me that innovation and fresh perspective can be equally valuable. Sometimes the best solution to an ancient problem comes from someone who is too young to know that it's supposed to be impossible." Marcus smiled at the compliment. "And you've taught me that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are also the most elegant ones." Your mining techniques are works of art, not just engineering. You've shown me that excellence isn't just about getting the job done, it's about doing it in ways that are beautiful and meaningful. 6 months after Operation Dragon Wash, Kepler Mining Station Omega 7 hosted its first interspecies cultural festival, an event that would have been impossible in the days when the lower levels were toxic and uninhabitable. Workers from dozens of different worlds gathered to share their traditions, their knowledge, and their appreciation for the diversity that made their community strong. The festival's centerpiece was a performance by Zayrath, who had discovered that his restored vocal capabilities allowed him to create music of extraordinary beauty and complexity. His songs combined harmonic frequencies that resonated through crystalline structures, creating symphonies of light and sound that left audiences speechless with wonder. As Marcus stood in the crowd, watching his friend perform for an audience that included representatives from across the galaxy, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple hygiene problem had become an opportunity for transformation, not just for Zayrath, but for everyone involved. The festival concluded with a ceremony honoring the partnership between the station's diverse species, with special recognition for the collaboration between human ingenuity and crystalline dragon wisdom that had made it all possible. Zayrath spoke for the community, his voice carrying clearly through the station's atmospheric systems. We gather today not as separate species working toward individual goals, but as a single community united by our shared commitment to excellence, he said, his words translated into 67 different languages simultaneously. We have learned that our differences are not obstacles to be overcome, but resources to be celebrated and shared. The human who taught me to be clean again also taught me that true strength comes from the willingness to change, to grow, and to accept help from unexpected sources. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he listened to his friend's words. He had come to Kepler Station as a simple mining foreman, expecting to spend his assignment managing equipment and personnel. Instead, he had discovered that sometimes the most important problems are the ones that everyone else is too afraid or too polite to address directly. The story of the dragon who forgot how to bathe had become something of a legend throughout the consortium, told and retold in mining stations across the galaxy as an example of how persistence, creativity, and mutual respect could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. But for Marcus, the real lesson was simpler and more personal. Sometimes the best way to help someone change is to help them remember who they really are underneath all the accumulated grime of time and habit. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is also the most obvious one. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, solving someone else's problem can lead to the kind of friendship that spans the gulf between species and survives the test of time. As the festival wound down and the various species began returning to their quarters, Zayrath approached Marcus with an expression of contentment that the human had come to treasure. "Thank you, my friend," the dragon said simply, "for everything, for seeing past the surface to the being underneath, for treating me with the respect I had forgotten I deserved, for helping me become myself again." Marcus nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the dragon's natural body heat. "Thank you for trusting me, for teaching me that sometimes the most important maintenance isn't on the machines but on ourselves, for showing me what it means to take pride in excellence." And as they stood together in the restored cavern that had become Zayrath's magnificent domain, surrounded by gleaming equipment and sparkling crystalline walls, both beings understood that they had accomplished something far more important than solving an atmospheric problem or improving mining efficiency. They had proven that with enough determination, creativity, and mutual respect, any problem could be solved, any relationship could be built, and any being could rediscover the beauty they had forgotten they possessed. The dragon was clean, the station was thriving, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other beings were learning that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or weapons or ancient wisdom. Sometimes it's just a human with a pressure washer and the stubborn refusal to accept that any problem is truly impossible to solve.